Hi, this is Jeff Altman, the Big Game Hunter, and you're listening to Job Search Radio. And we're bringing a completely different style to this show this week. You see, one of my secret delights is watching makeovers on TV. You know, I used to watch Queer Eye for the Straight Guy, and I really loved it. And now I'll watch home makeovers. You know, I'll walk into someone's home, take a look around. Oh, my God, what a disaster. And now suddenly it's transformed in 30 or 60 minutes to something spectacular. Well, I thought of bringing that format to this show as well. And I sent out a call and was responded to by many, many people who were interested in the idea of having their job search made over. Today's show is an interview with someone who I only call Danny. I don't identify where he works because he's still working now, and thought that talking with you as I dissect his background, his resume, his LinkedIn profile, some of the things he's been doing in his job search would make for great learning for you and pretty enjoyable time. So hang in there while we go for a ride with Danny. I hope you enjoy the show.
Are you looking for a new job or interested in leveling up? Job Search Radio is your go-to resource for insider tips on job hunting and growing your career. Here's your host, Jeff Altman.
My guest in this show is Danny, who's agreed to appear on and receive a job search makeover from me. Danny, welcome to Job Search Radio. Glad to have you on, and tell my listeners a little bit about the work that you do.
Oh, hi, Jeff. So the work that I'm doing right now, I'm doing supply planning. I'm supply planning manager for a big company, and I'm trying to find other opportunities, trying to get my resume in shape. And within supply planning, I manage inventory, and I have about 20 years experience within supply chain, doing from factory through forecasting and SNOP and other processes within supply chain.
Terrific. How did you become interested in the field?
Well, it kind of evolved based on the jobs that I got, and then I got a great opportunity with Intel like 20 years ago, and the company gave me the opportunity to rotate into multiple areas of the supply chain, starting from manufacturing, warehousing, shipping logistics, program management, forecasting, you name it. The company gave me the chance to even do joint ventures with other companies, collaboration with smartphones providers. Great experience.
I agree. And if I remember correctly, you started your work outside the U.S. and then eventually got a position in the U.S. with that previous employer. Am I correct?
That's correct. The company gave me the chance and relocated me to Portland, where I've been in the last 15 years.
Terrific. So why did you decide to go look for another position? What's not working for you with your current employer that prompted you to consider other opportunities?
Well, at this time, I've been too far from the East Coast. All my family is in the East Coast, so I would like to move from the West to the East, and that's what is motivating me to look for other opportunities.
Have you gotten clear about where on the East Coast that you've decided to look for a position?
Yes, specifically South Florida, like Fort Lauderdale, Boca, Miami, that area.
Terrific. So how have things been going so far on your search? Are you getting many interviews? Tell me.
I'm getting interviews, about 3 interviews a month. But most of those interviews are coming from the West Coast. Great companies. I'm getting calls from Amazon, from Apple, from Pace, which is a company that makes wireless networks. But everything is West Coast, and I'm looking for East Coast.
And in terms of communicating, how are firms finding you? Are they finding you through LinkedIn, or are they responding to your resume? How are they reaching out to you?
They usually I get contacted via LinkedIn, and I get an email, and from there we go into first screening and then interview.
Terrific. And is it common knowledge that you're looking for something on the East Coast within your firm? Do they know that you're open to something else, or are you keeping this quiet?
Well, I'm keeping it quiet, except when I get an invite or a call or an email. I openly say, well, I'm looking for the East Coast. And then, conversation start that the opportunity is West Coast. So even though we have different interests, we go into interview process and trying to know more. I also kind of try to see if there is more interest on having me on the East, and the company keeps, the interest is, positions are open basically on the West.
Gotcha. And this is terrific because it's really giving me a good framework within which I can help you. And I want to start by saying you've been getting some good results from LinkedIn, but the problem for you is that since most organizations tend to think of taking a square peg for a square hole, it's why you're getting contacts from firms that are West Coast based, because there's no way that you can really communicate on your profile that you're open to something on the East Coast without revealing that you're looking for another job. So it's a little bit of a bind in terms of communicating to firms that you are interested in where you are. And we're just going to have to work with that. It's very simple. So in a previous show, I quoted an old friend of mine, Perry Newman, who basically said that resumes are for when you're in the hunter mode, and LinkedIn is for when you want to be hunted. Now, or your LinkedIn profile is for when you want to be hunted. So I want to start by doing a quick critique of your resume. I'm going to circle back to your LinkedIn profile. We're going to go through some strategies for how to contend with this relocation issue and how to be most effective with it. Does that sound good?
That sounds perfect.
Terrific. So first of all, I noticed with your resume, it's about 5 pages long, and that's too long. You're going to have to cut it back, ideally to 2.5 pages, but that may take more meat out of it than you may want. And I'm going to offer a suggestion on the show, and folks, you'll be able to find a link in the show notes to Danny's resume, which I'll made a couple of changes to hide his current and previous employers, and certainly not have his phone number there. So, folks, if you're a recruiter, you're just going to have to find him another way. But you'll have an idea of his background as I'm reviewing the resume. So one thing that you did that I'm going to make a suggestion that you change right off the bat is that you embedded the header on your resume. And what that does is it can interfere with the applicant tracking system parsing with many of the databases that recruiters use. Now, corporations may have a better one, but if you're sending a resume to a third-party recruiter, some of the applicant tracking systems are not quite good enough to get the parsing down. So just remove it from an embedded function. Have it on page 1, because really people don't read printed out resumes anymore. They're looking at screenshots on their computer system or on their phone, and if you have it embedded, it will interfere with the tracking system. So that's suggestion number 1 for you. There are a couple of things I noticed that were interesting to me. And one thing I noticed in your executive summary area of the resume versus your general qualifications section right below it was under the summary you referred to having great exposure to P&L. and then there's just a statement of P&L exposure. Now, exposure to most firms indicates a lesser knowledge than not having exposure, than just having experience. So if you just have an exposure, it suggests that you don't have a lot of work with it. Now, if you do have a lot of work with managing a P&L, you might just simply state it as having P&L experience. By the way, with P&L, there are two ways that it can appear online. One is the way that you did with capitals P, small n, capital L. There's another way that some firms use where instead of the letter N, they use an ampersand, the and sign.
Yeah.
So you might just notice what the convention is for your field and make sure you're using the right one for your resume. So that was a second thing I happened to notice. In the first sentence under executive summary, supply chain architect for distinct models like. Now, the use of the term supply chain architect is really only used in your resume during that section. So I thought, firms will pick up on that because they're going to be looking for other examples of you architecting. Now, that may be implied in what you do and how you describe your work, but some people who are going to be screening your resume, and certainly if you're submitting it through an applicant tracking system, the systems often aren't intelligent enough to discern the difference because sometimes one of the rules is multiple uses on the first page. So you want to be sure that if you are actually a supply chain architect, you mention it later on under professional experience with your current employer on that first page of your resume. That'll deal with the issue related to applicant tracking. Another thing is under executive summary where you talk about targeting for supply chain or business operations positions, you could extend that sentence to describe geographically where you're looking, which will at least give firms an opportunity to see that you're really looking for something, for example, in Florida or on the East Coast. And that becomes a way that you can communicate with them more clearly where your geographic target is. Okay?
Perfect.
Now, thank you. Now, as we continue, you've had multiple positions with each of your two major employers. And the way you decided to indicate those multiple positions is pretty common. You put the dates of each assignment in the left-hand column, the employer name on top, the city and state that it's located in, and the title directly underneath the employer name. A lot of people do that. And I want to make a slightly different suggestion to you. And I think it will go a nice way toward making it easy for employers to see that you've had two lengthy employment stints with each of your companies. So using the current firm as a model, in the left-hand side, I'd like you to consider putting in your start date with your current employer. The first assignment that you had back when? In 2013?
Yes.
So you have the month and the year on the left-hand column to present. And on the right-hand side, next to each job title that you've held, there's where I want you to put the dates for where you held that assignment. It's going to make it less messy for the reader, and they'll be able to clearly see that you had two lengthy employment stints with each firm, and then on each occasion you got promoted into new roles. Now, where you would put that, for example, if I may, in the left-hand column you're having the total aggregated dates that you work for each firm. to the right-hand side, on the same line as the job title, you would have the date that you held the assignment. Now, I don't think it's necessary, for example, next to your employer's name to put the city and state that it's in repeatedly. I think you can just have it the first time that you held to indicate that you're working for this company in this location. And we'll get to how that varies with your previous employer in just a moment. So I think generally the content in your resume is very good, but I picked up on one other thing that you did, certainly with your current employer, and I noticed at a couple of occasions in previous roles that you held, and that is tenses. So you say, for example, on the first line, that establish supply chain strategy. And on the line underneath, manage a network of. So you might just simply say, responsible for establishing a supply chain strategy. So each of those would be bullet points underneath those items. Or if it's a past tense event, so for example on page 2 under your previous employer, where you still have it in the present tense, establish and initiate. Well, you have to put it in the past tense. You're not doing it anymore. So a little thing from a grammar standpoint that at the end of the day can cost you money. So that's why I'm making the recommendation that you change the tenses of things to reflect when you actually did the work. Now, one additional thing I want you to consider doing is including metrics for the impact of what you've done, which particularly in supply chain can be huge. So think in terms of how much money some of these efforts that you engaged in helped your firm make or save. So if, for example, work that you did for your current employer helped them save, I don't know, $127 million or $27 million, or make them that amount of money, include that, because that becomes a barometer for the impact of the work that you've done and how it's profited your organization. To me, it's not quite enough to simply say, I did these tasks. Because a lot of people do tasks, but important people affect the bottom line. So even if you're not sure, you can, and numbers are not relevant in the work that you do, you consider talking about how what you've done was 27% better or 7% better than a comparable supply chain individual in the function that you're in. So you can make a comparison with someone else and show how what you've done benefited your organization. That makes sense?
It makes totally sense. So I have a question about how to organize the resume. So you mentioned that putting the job title together, right? So for the current company I'm at, so we changed the start date from the year I started and list the role that I have. So the role would be in chronological order from the oldest to the newest. Is that right?
Just as you have it on the existing resume, yes, with the date off that you held the role to the right-hand side on the same line
yes.
as that position.
Perfect. So far, reduce the header, modify the header, 2.5 pages long, the P&L verbiage, change past tense on prior roles, modify the format, show what I'm targeting in the header. The supply chain architect mentioned that where else. Yeah.
You can mention the geography on the same line for what you're targeting, yes.
Yes. This is great feedback, Jeff. Appreciate that.
Thank you. And you can do the same thing about the dates for your previous employer. Now, the one change I would make to what I'm saying, so, for example, in your previous employer, you joined them back in the early 1990s. I don't want to mention the specific date because I don't want to do anything that's going to trigger your current employer. Could that possibly be? You have the aggregated dates of whatever that was in the early 90s to when you finished up each one. And, for example, on that previous employer, for the U.S.-based positions, the first time you mention a U.S.-based assignment, you put where, the city and state in. You don't need to mention it any further, nor have the company name mentioned any further. It's just the function and the date off to the right. But when you get to the work that you did outside the U.S., I again want you to mention the company name and where that was. And then the first time underneath it, you mention your title and the date off to the right-hand side. And continue that on without the city and location, just the title and the date off to the right-hand side. And folks, you'll be able to follow along at jobsearchradio.com. I'll have a page there with the old resume so you can see what I'm pointing to. Now, I would also mention that at the end of your current resume, you have your strengths listed. I don't think that's necessary because I think on page 1, you spoke to where a lot of your experience is. So you don't need to repeat some of that stuff, although I would still include the additional information, that you run and you're a black belt, that you volunteer, things along those lines are fine. And if you can't keep the resume to 3 pages, that's my max. I tell people 3 pages, you sacrifice the volunteering. Now, when we go over to your LinkedIn profile, generally it's the same item. And I want to first start off by complimenting you. Great photo you used. Great photo. You're looking right at the camera. You're professionally. You present yourself. Folks, I can't show you the LinkedIn profile. It'll reveal who he works for and can cause him a problem. You use the line underneath your name well. If there's a little bit more, like instead of supply planning manager, you may, since your resume refers to supply chain architect in the executive summary, if it fits better, or you can do supply planning manager, supply chain architect at your employer, well, that will allow you to use up a little bit more space, and it will be a keyword that people will help find you with. It'll be a second instance of it being mentioned on the profile. Folks, if you listen to a previous show I did with Steve Levy, one of the things corporate recruiters do after they open the resume is they go to a LinkedIn profile to see if it's congruent with what they're reading. So you've done a pretty good job of doing that. Your summary on your profile is very similar to the executive summary on your resume. One suggestion I would make for your summary is adding one additional thing, and that actually 2 additional things on one line. You can say, if you'd like to reach me, you can email me at, and provide your email address, or call me at, and thus make it easy for people to reach you. Now, another thing I noticed is there were a couple of instances with your LinkedIn profile, there were spelling errors. So I would simply say copy and paste the entire profile into a Word file or whatever your preferred word processor is, And then from there, I would say run a spell check on your profile, because there were a few spelling errors that I picked up on. And one grammatical error I picked up on the third bullet point, I believe, under your current job, where you talk about the business model to enable products to be always available, I believe was the way you phrase it, and it should be to always be available at. So a small grammar thing. So run a spell checker and a grammar checker on your LinkedIn profile. Another thing I would suggest is that for you may want to use LinkedIn as a hunter and not just simply allowing yourself to be hunted. I'm not sure if you're using it in that way yet, but there are things that you can be doing to look at firms that you'd be interested in working for, and seeing who works for that organization who you know, even as a second or third level connection, and reach out to them and connect and start working to build a relationship. So, for example, using one of the firms that you mentioned previously, Amazon. If Amazon happened to have had a facility in Florida, you might try and see who you are connected with currently works for Amazon in Florida. And these days, LinkedIn made a change where they allow people to see third-level connections. So that's in the last couple of months, that change has gone into effect. So you'll be able to see more of what you might have not previously been able to see, and thus be able to connect with new people and make them first-level connections. Now, another thing I want to point to that most people don't do as part of their search is if you go to, in the current version of LinkedIn on the top, and highlight the profile tab word on the ribbon across the top and let it drop down, you look at who's viewed your profile. And when you click on that, you're going to see everyone who's looked at your profile, which is wonderful because you can now see who didn't contact you. And then send a message to them that says, "Hi, I noticed you happened to look at my LinkedIn profile but didn't contact me. Is there something you want to know about me that prompted you to reach out? Is there anything I can be doing to help you?" And this is going to create good activity for you. Now, again, we're going to go into doing research. I'm going to encourage you to research organizations in your target geography that would appeal to you. And I also want to encourage you, I know it's mentioned on your profile very prominently, on the bottom, but you might include in your summary, for example, on your resume and on your LinkedIn profile, but right off the bat, bilingual supply chain architect, or bilingual, in parentheses, Spanish-English supply chain architect. So it's much more visually spotted than it is right now. How are you doing on your phone interviews? You mentioned you've gotten a couple.
Yeah, so on my phone interviews, I usually go through the first one, but I don't pass the first one. Sometimes I think that I have too much in my resume, I think I'm giving the perception I'm doing too many things, maybe like a perfect employee, and I've been thinking even to scale back what I'm even showing in my resume. What do you think?
Too, yeah, when I looked at your core qualifications section of your resume, that looked like a lot. And I thought you could simplify that and remove some items. And by the way, on one of the bullet points, one of the items that you have here in the right-hand column, manufacturing, when I printed it out, I saw that the second bullet point, SAP, SCM, etc., SAP wasn't quite lined up correctly for that column. Everything else is. I would simply say scale back where you can. Where your experience is light, if you're going to mention in the body of the resume, that's great. But it doesn't have to be illustrated so prominently at the beginning. Folks, if you happen to work in IT, it's kind of like every piece of software that you ever touched or spelled is now in the resume, when in fact that you have experience with 5 or 6 things primarily. You should really emphasize the 5 or 6 things. So for you, the same thing applies. Emphasize the primary skills that you have. That will serve you best. And one of the things I would also mention to you is on your phone interviews, when they reach out to you, are they trying to schedule an interview or do it right away while you're on the phone?
No, we schedule interviews. So I go through a pre-screening first, and then we schedule time for the interview.
Terrific. Is the pre-screening and the phone interview done with the same person?
No, the pre-screening is done either with HR or somebody that is screening candidates, and then we go into interview.
Great. So my thought is that when you get the phone call from whoever it is to screen you, I want you to thank them for making the call and say, could you tell me a little bit about the position that you're going to evaluate me for and how I might be able to help? And you say that right away. So as soon as they introduce themselves, hi, this is Ramesh from Amazon. I'd like to talk with you about a position in supply chain for our organization. Do you have a few minutes? Yeah, sure, Ramesh. I have plenty of time for you. Could you give me an idea about the role that you're working on now and what I could do to help? And what that's going to do is make him talk with you about the position that they're screening you for, right at the beginning. So this way, when you answer questions, you know what he's looking for in your background, and thus can talk about what you've done that relates to what matters to him. Now, one of the things I'm going to do when we're finished with our interview is send you 2 audios that I've done. One is called Winning Phone Interviews, and the other one is Winning In-Person Interviews. They're MP3s that you can listen to that will help you prepare for your interviews. Because I think that's one of the things that happens to a lot of folks is they don't take the time to research because we're all busy these days. We don't take the time to do a lot of things that we can do to prepare, whether it's a phone interview or an in-person. So I'll send you copies of each of those. Folks, you can find out about them at my website, thebiggamehunter.us. So we're starting to come up on the end of our time with one another, and I know I've spent a lot of time on resumes and LinkedIn profiles, but I want to make sure I cover some territory that was in your mind as well. So do you have any final questions for me?
Yes, I have one more question, and I really appreciate it. All the feedback. This is awesome. I have a resume, a one-pager that is in PowerPoint, and I basically have all the positions listed and my skills, and a flow showing the different supply chain areas that I have touched. Would that be something that add value to, as a presentation, showing my skills, or you think that PowerPoint is not something for resumes?
I think it's less desirable. I think when you get to the point of actually meeting with a firm or have the interview scheduled with the firm, you can forward a PowerPoint to them and say, this can be a guideline to our conversation, or simplify some of the major points in my background for you and might guide you in our conversation. But beyond that, I would not make that the first item that they get from you. I might make it something that is sent to them before you have the more in-depth interview.
Perfect. I don't have any other questions, Jeff. I appreciate your time.
Danny, you are very welcome. Folks, I hope you found this interesting and helpful. I'm happy to do more job search makeovers. And if you're interested in having a makeover done, email me at thebiggamehunter@gmail.com. I can't select everyone, but I would like to do a couple more with folks at intermittent times. And I would also encourage you to come over to my website, thebiggamehunter.us, because I've got a ton of content there that you can watch, listen to, or read that'll help you find work more quickly. So, folks, I'll be back next time. I've got a great show planned for you. I'm Jeff Altman. Hope you have a great day.
For more job search advice, visit Jeff's website at thebiggamehunter.us. That's thebiggamehunter.us.